If you've learned anything about the cell membrane already, it was probably one of these two things. The cell membrane is a barrier that controls what goes in and out of the cell, and it's made of phospholipids. Both of these things are true. Today we'll layer on a little more information about the selectively permeable membrane, and we'll learn about the membrane as a fluid mosaic. It's made of phospholipids, but also proteins, and each of which plays a key role in how the membrane is selectively permeable. Let's talk about the phospholipid bilayer and phospholipids in general. They are a vital part of the cell membrane, phospholipids are, because they have a polar and a non-polar region. When you look at a phospholipid, it has this polar hydrophilic or water-loving head made of a phosphate group and other ions, and it has this non-polar hydrophobic or water-fearing region made of tails that are actually fatty acids. Because the phospholipid has a polar and a non-polar region, it's called an amphipathic molecule. Put a bunch of phospholipids in a water-based, or what we call an aqueous environment, and they naturally bunch up where the tails are together because they are mutually excluded by the water or the water-loving heads. They can bunch into little fat globules called micelles, or create bilayers with 2 layers of phospholipids where the tails face in and the heads face out towards the water. A small sphere of lipid bilayer is called a liposome. These liposomes are actually being studied now as a drug delivery system, but just phospholipids in general are amazingly helpful membrane makers because the tails always want to stay separate from water and the heads always want to face the water. These bilayers self-assemble, no energy required, and they can fuse together or pinch apart very much like the behavior of bubble soap in air. Fatty acid tails can vary. They can be saturated, meaning all carbons are saturated with hydrogen, so you see a lot of CH2s as a part of that fatty acid, or unsaturated, meaning there are one or more double bonds, and so there are a couple of carbons here that are only attached to a single hydrogen. And the unsaturated fats can be trans or cis unsaturated fats. You're looking at a cis monounsaturated fatty acid. Monounsaturated means there is only one double bond in this fatty acid. You see some double bonds up in that carboxyl group, but we're talking about like the hydrocarbon part of the fatty acid. Cis fats have hydrogens coming off the same side of the double bond. Living organisms create cis fats. This is the kind of unsaturated fat we make. Cis double bonds create a kink or a bend in the fatty acid. Humans actually created trans fats to make fatty acids straighten out, to make oils behave more like saturated fats. So you can see just the little modification I had to make there. The fatty acid stays straight. All of these differences allow for differences in the fluidity of a cell membrane made from phospholipids that are mostly saturated or somewhat unsaturated. So let's take a look at this. Here are some phospholipids with different kinds of fatty acids. And we take these phospholipids and we build them into bilayers. And the bilayer with more unsaturated fats opens up space. You can see more white space in that bottom bilayer. And that's going to make that membrane more fluid at any given temperature than the one made of mostly saturated fats. And that allows creatures to adapt the fluidity of their membranes to whatever their environment they're in. We'll take a look at that some more on the next slide. So more unsaturated fats means more space for movement. That's great for cold environments. If there's more saturated fats, there's less space for movement, and that's really good for warm environments, so that the overall movement within the membrane stays kind of at the ideal fluidity or viscosity for each organism's body temperature. So I want you to think about a bunch of fats at room temperature. Tropical plant oils are solid, typically. Butter is solid. Fish oil is liquid, and so is olive oil. Think about the organisms that these fats come from. Where do they live? How warm or cold is it there? Is there a pattern? Absolutely, there's a pattern, and that's not an accident. Organisms that are warm-blooded or come from warm regions have more saturated fats and are more solid at room temperature. Organisms that are cold-blooded, live in cold environments, or even those olives that grow, in mountainous regions and are exposed to much cooler air, they are liquid at room temperature. There is more to the membrane than just the phospholipids, and we'll look at that in our next video lesson.